The other Allied commanders could hardly believe his words. They thought he was bluffing or that the pressure of war had made him lose his mind. Even the Germans, on the other side of the front, smiled in disbelief. Yet, in that December of 1944, a surprising gambit by Hitler had opened a gaping wound in the Allied lines in the Ardennes, giving rise to what the press would soon nickname the Bulge. The Wehrmacht generals were convinced they had achieved the unthinkable, a secret operation of strategic magnitude that would catch the Americans, overconfident as they were, completely off guard. The goal was ambitious: to split the Allied armies in two and force a surrender, relying on the overwhelming advance of three German armies, 250,000 men and 1,000 tanks, through frozen forests toward Antwerp. But no one, either in Berlin nor elsewhere, had considered George Patton. Nor could they have imagined that, during one of the coldest winters of recent decades, a single man would be capable not only of halting the German advance but of turning their boldest offensive into the Wehrmacht's worst disaster on the Western Front. This is the story of how Patton's Third Army dyed the snow red with enemy blood, turning Hitler's final gamble into the greatest American battlefield victory. George Smith Patton, Jr., a 59-year-old lieutenant general, had been born in 1885 into a military family and had devoted his life from a young age to perfecting every detail of his preparation. He knew that one day he would be called to lead men in the brutality of modern warfare, where the decisions of a single commander could change the fate of entire armies. By December 1944, he commanded the Third Army, an impressive formation of over 250,000 men and hundreds of tanks, already renowned as the most aggressive and feared tank commander among the Allied forces. But everything changed on December 16. While the Third Army was advancing in the Saar region, preparing for a thrust toward Germany's industrial heartland, Hitler unleashed Operation Watch on the Rhine. Before dawn, 29 German divisions overwhelmed the weak American lines in the Ardennes forest, catching the Allies completely unprepared. The offensive was daring and colossal: to advance over 100 kilometers through Belgium and Luxembourg, seize the strategic port of Antwerp, and split the British and American forces. But what made the attack extraordinary was not only its scale, but its flawless timing. Allied intelligence had detected nothing. The Wehrmacht moved silently, transferring 250,000 men and 1,000 tanks under the cover of night and radio silence. When the offensive erupted, the element of surprise was total. Within hours, German armored columns were advancing westward, overrunning American positions and throwing Allied command into chaos. The most critical moment came on December 19, when General Dwight Eisenhower called an urgent conference in Verdun. Enemy forces had already penetrated 30 kilometers into Belgium, threatening strategic junctions and the vital town of Bastogne. The First Army was fragmented, with units destroyed or scattered. If the German push continued at that pace, Antwerp would soon be within reach. To understand what happened next, one must know the man destined to change the course of the battle. Patton had prepared for that moment his entire life. As a young officer, he had studied the great commanders of history, Napoleon, Alexander, Caesar, convinced he was destined to lead a great army in a desperate conflict. His early experiences in World War I, leading America's first armored units, had taught him the decisive importance of mobility, audacity, and rapid maneuvers, principles that were about to write a new page in history. However, Patton's march toward the Ardennes was neither straightforward nor without obstacles. His reputation, built in the sands of North Africa and on the coasts of Sicily, had been tarnished by the controversial slapping incidents, when he had struck two soldiers suffering from combat stress. Those episodes threatened to end his career and excluded him from the first D-Day landings, casting a shadow over his name. Yet his extraordinary command ability and strategic brilliance made him an indispensable piece on the Allied chessboard. The Germans feared him more than any other American general, even incorporating him into a complex deception that convinced them the main invasion would occur at Calais rather than Normandy. When the Third Army entered France in July 1944, Patton had refined his control over his impulsive tendencies. His command style was unique. While other generals stayed holed up in secure headquarters, he traveled the front lines, often in an open jeep, under enemy fire, sharing risk and fatigue with his troops. He knew soldiers needed to see their commander facing the same hardships to feel part of a shared destiny. The speed with which the Third Army advanced across France was tangible proof of Patton's tactical genius. After the breakout from Normandy, his troops covered over 1,000 kilometers in just 4 months, liberating thousands of square kilometers and capturing hundreds of thousands of German prisoners. But the autumn of 1944 brought unexpected challenges: supply problems, stubborn German resistance, and fortified cities like Metz slowed the advance to a crawl. Many began to doubt that Patton was effective only against a retreating enemy and less capable of handling determined opposition. The Battle of the Bulge would prove them wrong. Patton demonstrated that superior leadership and strategic foresight could turn seemingly impossible logistical obstacles into extraordinary victories. When Eisenhower asked him how long it would take to redirect the Third Army north for a counterattack, his answer left everyone speechless. While others were still struggling to comprehend the scope of the German offensive, Patton was already several steps ahead. Unknown to his colleagues in Verdun, he had already anticipated this possibility. Intelligence staff had noted unusual German movements and prepared 3 contingency plans for a sudden turn north. This was the pinnacle of his genius, not reacting to events, but anticipating them. While others were paralyzed by surprise, Patton saw an opportunity to seize. The proposal he put forward defied every military convention. 6 divisions, pulled from active combat, rotated 90 degrees and marched over 160 kilometers through snow, ice, and freezing temperatures, all while maintaining combat readiness. By the standards of military manuals, it was impossible. Moving an army in contact with the enemy is among the most complex maneuvers, and doing so in winter, keeping both secrecy and operational effectiveness, seemed sheer madness. But Patton knew a truth no manual could teach: audacity could turn despair into triumph. His principle was simple and unwavering: attack. Always attack. Because the enemy was almost always more fragile than he appeared, and speed of action, combined with the ferocity of command, could overturn any disadvantage. It was not reckless courage, but calculated aggressiveness, the result of meticulous preparation and a deep understanding of the enemy's limits. Patton immediately identified the crucial flaw in the German plan. Hitler's offensive was fragile at its core. It relied on perfect timing and flawless execution. The German forces' fuel reserves were low, barely enough for 6 days of combat, and the continuation of the advance would depend on seizing Allied depots. Any delay would doom the operation, while Allied air superiority and the arrival of American reinforcements would soon crush the invaders. Patton's solution was conceptually simple, yet incredibly difficult to execute. Instead of confronting the German spearhead where it was strongest, he would strike at its most vulnerable point, at the base of the Bulge. His 3-division plan aimed not only to relieve the besieged garrison of Bastogne, but also to threaten to trap the entire enemy spearhead. On December 19, just after leaving the conference in Verdun, Patton set the plan in motion. He contacted his headquarters and uttered only 2 words: "Play ball." This simple command activated the directives already prepared by his staff. Within hours, over 133,000 vehicles of the Third Army began one of the most complex military maneuvers in history. The 4th Armored Division, the 81st, and the 26th Infantry Division advanced northward, followed by convoys carrying 62,000 tons of supplies. Conditions were brutal, the harshest winter in recent memory, temperatures around -7 degrees Celsius, and snowfall so heavy that visibility was reduced to a few meters. American soldiers lacked proper winter clothing. Many wore light cotton jackets or wool coats insufficient to face the cold. Weapons and engines required constant maintenance. Trucks had to be started every half hour to prevent oil from solidifying. But Patton had anticipated everything. He knew that winter warfare was as much a battle of morale as of logistics. While other commanders sheltered in heated headquarters, he traveled the lines in an open jeep, wearing only a heavy parka. His face froze in the biting wind, yet he continued inspecting the troops daily, ensuring everyone knew he was present. The psychological effect was enormous. Soldiers, forced to fight in conditions that would have broken less experienced units, drew courage from knowing that old blood and guts shared their hardship. His words spread quickly. The old man says, "We are the best soldiers in the world." Or, "Georgie says, this is our finest hour." These were not empty words. Patton truly believed in his men's abilities, and his confidence became theirs. The German reaction demonstrated the brilliance of Patton's strategy. General Erich Brandenberger, commander of the 7th Army opposite the American sector, expected a rapid response, aware of Patton's reputation for aggressive armored warfare and his understanding of mobile warfare in the German style. Yet he was astonished by the speed and precision of the Third Army's northward turn. The German commanders could not believe that an Allied force could execute such a complex maneuver in winter. Their experience in Russia had taught them that the cold could paralyze even the most advanced war machines. They assumed the Americans, known for relying on logistics and comfort, would be vulnerable to the freezing temperatures. This miscalculation revealed the fundamental flaw in the German strategy. They had underestimated the audacity, foresight, and command ability of a man who could turn every obstacle into an opportunity. The Germans continued to underestimate the true effectiveness of the American army, imagining soldiers well equipped but lacking the fighting spirit and tactical skills necessary. General G.A. Blumentritt would later admit, "We considered Patton the most aggressive tank commander among the Allies. His operations had impressed us enormously because they reflected our ideal of classical military command. But by December 1944, the Wehrmacht was no longer the force that had conquered Europe in 1940. The German divisions engaged in the Ardennes were a heterogeneous mosaic, elite units alongside improvised formations made up of boys and older men. Many soldiers had been hungry for days and lacked proper winter clothing. Their vehicles ran on synthetic fuel that performed poorly in the cold, and supply lines were already stretched beyond the limit. The battle around Bastogne revealed how much the American army had transformed, from an inexperienced force that had landed in North Africa in 1942 to a professional, battle-tested military machine. The defense of the town by the 101st Airborne Division became legendary, but it was Patton's relief operation that turned a defensive stand into an offensive triumph. When the Germans demanded Bastogne's surrender, the response of a single man, Brigadier General Anthony Micallef, "Nuts!" entered history as a symbol of American determination. On December 22, in the heart of a massive snowstorm, Patton's Third Army launched the attack. 3 divisions moved in unison, taking the Germans completely by surprise, convinced that winter conditions would prevent any major Allied counteroffensive. On a front of roughly 32 kilometers, American tanks and infantry struck the enemy flank, advancing 11 kilometers on the first day. The fighting was ruthless. The American forces, spurred on by Patton's constant demands for aggressive action, refused to give ground. The 4th Armored Division, at the head of the advance toward Bastogne, faced some of the most formidable German units. Tigers and Panthers clashed with Sherman tanks and American tank destroyers on frozen fields that quickly became scenes of total destruction. Pragmatic and devoted to tactics, Patton tasked the Third Army chaplain, Colonel James Hugh O'Neill, with writing a prayer to ask for a clearing of the clouds so air support could be provided. The prayer, circulated among the troops, read, "Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech you to restrain these unbridled powers we face. Grant us fair weather for the battle." On December 23, miraculously, the clouds parted. Allied fighter-bombers descended upon German positions like avenging angels. The breakthrough came on December 26, the day after Christmas. The 37th Armored Battalion of the 4th Division, led by Lieutenant Charles Bogus, broke through enemy defenses and linked up with the 101st in Bastogne. The gap was only 450 meters wide, but it was enough to break the encirclement and allow massive reinforcements to flow in. But Patton did not stop. While others might have considered the liberation of Bastogne sufficient, he observed the entire battlefield. The German offensive had scattered their forces, creating vulnerabilities to exploit for devastating counterattacks. "This time the Kraut has stuck his head in the meat grinder," he said to Bradley, "and I'm holding the handle." The entrenchment of German forces in the Ardennes required 6 weeks of grueling winter combat. American and German soldiers faced trials that defied description: trenches dug into frozen ground, weapons frozen and inoperable, men sharing body heat just to avoid dying from the cold. The snow, initially white and pristine, gradually turned red, a silent witness to the losses of thousands of soldiers on both sides. On January 16, 1945, when American forces advancing from the north and south met at Houffalize, the Bulge was finally broken. The German offensive, which Hitler had designed to split the Allies and force a negotiated peace, instead became a total disaster for the Wehrmacht. German losses exceeded 100,000 men, with over 700 tanks and 1,600 aircraft destroyed. Germany had exhausted its last strategic reserves in a failed gamble, marking the beginning of its irreversible decline on the Western Front. Patton's role in this triumph was decisive. His ability to move 6 full divisions in just 72 hours while maintaining full combat readiness remains one of the most extraordinary logistical feats in military history. As he later wrote to his wife, "Fate called me quickly when the situation became critical. Perhaps God saved me for this effort." The Battle of the Bulge demonstrated that George Patton was not merely an aggressive armored commander. He was a strategic genius, capable of turning desperate circumstances into decisive victories through audacity, foresight, and an incredible trust in his men. The Germans, who had mocked American capabilities in December, learned at a steep price in January that soldiers led by commanders like Patton could fight and win under the harshest conditions. Even Winston Churchill, known for his restraint in praising American achievements, called the Battle of the Bulge undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war. For Patton, however, it was much more, the confirmation of a life spent preparing for the moment when a single man could change the course of a battle, turning the impossible into the inevitable. The snow had turned crimson, but it was German blood staining the winter fields of the Ardennes, not American. The Battle of the Bulge revealed the fundamental truth that Patton understood better than any other commander of his generation: superior leadership, aggressive action, and unwavering trust in one's soldiers can overturn any tactical disadvantage. The Germans had launched their offensive confident that cold and American inexperience would ensure success. Instead, they discovered that George Patton's Third Army could fight anywhere, at any time, and against any enemy. The Ardennes were not Hitler's triumph, but his definitive defeat, and the moment when American forces achieved their highest hour of glory on the battlefield under the most extreme winter conditions. If this story moved you, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us shed light on the moments that shaped history. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and stay with us to discover more fascinating stories from the past.